New tonight, police have identified a man accused of shooting and killing a woman and injuring a second one early this morning. Authorities believe 26-year-old Johnny Osborne IV shot and killed 25-year-old Asia Grice. Another 25-year-old woman was hurt but is expected to survive. Investigators believe the shooting was targeted. It happened a little before 5 this morning on the 1600 block of 30th Street. That's at the Imperial Apartments complex on O Avenue. Osborne is charged with murder, attempted murder, and non-consensual termination of a pregnancy.
May 1st, 2020, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The quiet of the Imperial Apartments was broken by the crack of gunfire, each shot echoing through the stillness of a spring morning. Neighbors startled awake, unsure if what they heard was real or just another bad dream. But for two women inside apartment 11, the nightmare was real. One of them, 25-year-old Asia Grice, lay motionless. She was 5 months pregnant, carrying a son her family had already named King. The other, her close friend Kiana Smith, was fighting to stay alive, her body marked by multiple gunshot wounds. Police say the man who pulled the trigger wasn't a stranger. He was her boyfriend, someone she had let into her life, someone her friends say she had started making plans to leave. And in the weeks before her death, she allegedly uncovered a secret, one he may have been desperate to keep hidden. What could drive a man to kill the woman carrying his own child? Was it rage, fear, or the threat of exposure? This story will make you question how well we can ever truly know someone. This is the story of a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, a daughter, a sister, a friend, whose future was cut short in the place she should have felt safe. If you believe stories like this need to be told, like this video right now so more people can see it, subscribe so we can keep bringing the truth to light, comment where you're watching from, so the conversation reaches everywhere, and share this video, because the more we speak out, the harder it becomes for the world to ignore what happened. Asia Grice's story began in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where she grew up surrounded by a close, loving family. Those who knew her from those early years remember a young woman who carried herself with warmth, always looking out for others. When she later moved to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, she brought that same loyalty and deep sense of connection with her. She was the type of person who remembered every birthday, who sent messages just to check in, and who made sure the people she cared about knew they mattered. Friends describe her laugh as the kind that could fill a room, and her loyalty as the kind you could count on no matter what. By 25, Asia was starting to lay the foundation for the future she wanted. When she found out she was pregnant, she embraced the news with excitement. Her son already had a name, King. She spoke about the kind of life she wanted for him, safe, stable, and filled with love. At the time, Asia was living with her close friend, Kiana Smith, in an apartment at the Imperial Apartments complex. Kiana had a young son, and together the two women created a home that was more like a family space, full of the sounds of a little boy playing, late-night talks in the kitchen, and the comfort of knowing they had each other's backs. When Asia met 26-year-old Johnny Osborne in December of 2019, the connection moved fast. Within a month of dating, she found out she was pregnant. For Asia, it was a turning point in her life. She spoke with excitement about becoming a mother, already picturing what her child's life could be: safe, stable, and filled with love. But as quickly as the relationship had started, those around her began to notice changes. Friends and family who were used to her open, joyful energy started to see her pull back. She smiled less, her voice carried less enthusiasm, and she seemed more careful with what she said. There were signs that control was creeping in. People close to her noticed she was being monitored. Who she talked to, where she went, and how she spent her time became points of tension. Then, in the weeks before her death, a disturbing claim began to circulate among those who knew her best. According to friends, Asia confided that she had caught Osborne cheating on her with a man. It was the kind of discovery, they believed, that shook the foundation of their relationship. While there is no official confirmation of this in court records or police statements, the allegation spread quickly after the murder, fueling conversations online and in private circles about what may have pushed things to the edge. What is certain is that Asia began preparing for a change. She quietly started looking for her own apartment, talking with friends about wanting her own space where she could raise her baby in peace. For her, it wasn't just about moving out. It was about creating distance from a relationship that no longer felt safe. April 30th, 2020 was a Thursday, and for Asia Takara, it was a quiet night in the home she shared with her close friend, Kiana Smith, at the Imperial Apartments in Northwest Cedar Rapids. Kiana's young child was there too, and the evening carried the kind of ordinary rhythm the two women were used to. Conversation, tending to the little one, and settling in as the night grew late. They had shared the space for months, balancing life's responsibilities and supporting each other through it all. But in the early hours of May 1st, that normalcy was shattered. Sometime before 4:39 a.m., Johnny Osborn arrived at the apartment. What happened in the moments after his arrival comes from the accounts of the surviving victim, Kiana, and neighbors who heard what unfolded. Voices were raised. Neighbors reported hearing loud arguing, the kind that makes walls feel thinner, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire cutting through the early morning stillness. Inside apartment 11, the confrontation escalated with devastating speed. Asia was shot in the head, ending her life instantly. Her unborn son, King, was gone in that same moment. Kiana was also shot multiple times, including in the head, but against all odds, she survived. The child who had been in the home was not physically harmed, but the trauma of that night would leave its mark forever. At 4:39 a.m., the first reports of shots fired came in to police dispatch. Responding officers arrived to a scene that was no longer a home. It was a crime scene marked by chaos, loss, and the echoes of what had just happened. Emergency responders found Asia beyond help. Kiana was rushed for medical care, her survival nothing short of remarkable, given her injuries. Witness accounts and physical evidence quickly pointed to Osborn as the shooter. This wasn't an unknown suspect on the run in the shadows. It was someone who had been part of their daily lives. Police moved fast, gathering information and tracking his movements. Within just a few hours, Osborn was located at the Roadway Inn on 16th Avenue SW. By the time the sun was fully up that morning, the man accused of ending Asia's life and nearly taking Kiana's was in police custody. For those who loved Asia, the swiftness of his arrest brought no comfort. The night had changed everything, and no amount of speed in the investigation could undo the damage done inside that apartment. Kiana Smith lived through what no one should ever have to experience. On that early morning in May 2020, she was shot multiple times, including once in the head. The injuries were severe, and surviving them meant enduring an extensive recovery. She spent months healing, both physically and mentally, slowly regaining her strength. In the weeks after the shooting, she spoke about the long road back, how she had to learn to trust her body again, how every sudden noise made her heart race, and how the memories of that night were impossible to shut out. She carried not only the trauma of her own injuries, but the heavy grief of losing Asia, who had been like a sister to her. The home they had built together had been torn apart in an instant. Kiana also had to consider the impact on her young child, who had been in the apartment during the shooting. Even though the child was unharmed physically, the fear and disruption that followed left its own mark. She worked to create stability again, moving to a new home and eventually bringing her son back to live with her once she felt he would be safe. During the legal process, Kiana voiced her belief that others may have played a role in what happened. A police search warrant affidavit indicated that others were involved in some way, though no additional charges had been filed at the time. Police would not comment publicly on that part of the investigation, saying it was still active. But for Kiana, the thought that not everyone who contributed to that night's events had been held accountable was deeply unsettling. Even with Osborn in custody, the sense of unfinished justice lingered. Kiana's story is one of resilience, but also of the lasting toll violence takes on survivors. Her strength kept her moving forward, but the absence of her friend and the unanswered questions remain part of her daily reality. If you're still with me, you care about Asia's story. Like this video so more people see it. It helps keep her memory alive. In the hours after the shooting, investigators began piecing together what had happened inside apartment 11. The process started with the voices of those who had heard it unfold. Neighbors who reported loud arguing in the early morning hours, followed by the sharp, unmistakable sound of multiple gunshots. Their accounts gave police a critical starting point and a narrow window of time to work from. The most powerful piece of evidence came from the only adult survivor, Kiana Smith. Even while recovering from multiple gunshot wounds, she was able to tell investigators exactly who had pulled the trigger. Her account was direct and unwavering. It was Johnny Osborn. This was not a case of a masked intruder or an unknown assailant. The suspect was someone she knew, someone who had been living in the apartment not long before, and someone she said had turned a heated argument into an act of deadly violence. From that point forward, law enforcement moved quickly. They gathered witness statements, secured the scene, and began tracking Osborn's movements after he fled. Physical evidence from inside the apartment supported the accounts they had been given. By mid-morning, the search led them to the Roadway Inn on 16th Avenue SW in Cedar Rapids. There, officers found Osborn and took him into custody without further incident. The speed of the arrest underscored how strong the initial evidence was and how focused the investigation had become within just a few hours. Later that day, formal charges were filed. Osborn was charged with first-degree murder for the killing of Asia Takara Grace, attempted murder for the shooting of Kiana Smith, and non-consensual termination of a pregnancy for the death of Asia's unborn son, King. Each charge painted a devastating picture. This was not only the loss of one life, but two, and the near loss of a third. For the community, seeing the suspect in custody so quickly brought some relief, but it did little to soften the grief and shock of what had happened in the early morning hours of May 1st, 2020. Once Osborn was in custody, the legal process began, but it would not be swift. The case moved forward in the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused delays across the court system. Hearings were postponed, trial dates were pushed back, and each rescheduling forced Asia's family and friends to wait longer for resolution. What was initially set for trial was reset multiple times before finally being placed on the calendar for March of 2022. Prosecutors had prepared to pursue the original charges: first-degree murder, attempted murder, and non-consensual termination of a pregnancy. A conviction on the top count of first-degree murder would have meant life in prison without parole. But just days before the trial was scheduled to begin, Osborn entered into a plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, attempted murder, and termination of pregnancy during the commission of a felony. This plea removed the possibility of a life without parole sentence, but still carried decades behind bars. In May 2022, the court sentenced him to a total of 50 years in prison, with parole eligibility after serving 35 years on the murder conviction. The sentences on the other charges would run concurrently. The court also ordered him to pay $150,000 in restitution to Asia's estate, a requirement under Iowa law for certain homicide convictions. During the sentencing hearing, Asia's family addressed Osborn directly. Her mother, Morlyn Watson, called him a monster, standing in front of the man who had taken both her daughter and her unborn grandson. She spoke about the loss that could never be repaired, the milestones her family would never share with Asia, and the emptiness left behind. Other family members expressed deep frustration that the case did not go to a full trial. For them, the plea deal meant they would never hear every piece of evidence presented in open court, and they would never hear Osborn explain why he did what he did. That unanswered question, the motive, continued to weigh heavily on them. While the sentencing brought the case to a legal close, it could not deliver the closure the family needed. The reality of decades in prison for Osborn was something they accepted as the outcome, but it could not undo the fact that Asia and King were gone. Even after the sentencing, the question of why has never been fully answered. Prosecutors presented no official motive in court, leaving a void that has been filled only with speculation and the accounts of those who knew Asia best. Some who were close to her believe the violence was rooted in control. The loss of it, the fear of her leaving, and the shift in the relationship when she began planning for independence. Others point to what Asia herself allegedly confided in the weeks before her death, that she had caught Osborn cheating on her with a man. That claim, repeated by friends and gaining traction on social media after the murder, has never been confirmed in any court documents or official police statements. Whether or not it was true, those who loved her believe the combination of a controlling relationship and a decision to leave created a volatile and dangerous environment. Domestic violence experts often warn that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they try to separate from their abuser. And Asia was 5 months pregnant when she began making those plans. The risk to pregnant women in abusive relationships is significant, with studies showing that pregnancy can escalate tensions and increase the likelihood of violence. In Asia's case, the silence on motive leaves her family with a painful truth. They may never know exactly what triggered the events of that morning. What they do know is that a woman who was preparing for motherhood, working toward a safe and stable life, lost everything in the very place she should have been protected. The absence of answers does not lessen the reality of the danger she faced, and it serves as a reminder of the devastating cost that can come when control turns into violence. In the months and years that followed, the pain of losing Asia Takara Grice never faded for those who loved her. Each anniversary of her death became both a reminder of what was taken and a chance to honor the life she lived. At memorials, her family and friends decorated a tree in her honor, its branches wrapped in pink and white ribbons, photos clipped to the limbs, and handwritten notes tucked between them. It became a symbol of her presence, a living space where memories could be shared and her name could be spoken aloud. Vigils brought the community together, with candles lit against the evening sky, prayers offered, and voices calling for justice, not just for Asia and her unborn son, King, but for anyone trapped in the kind of dangerous relationship she was trying to leave. People remembered her laugh, her loyalty, and her excitement for motherhood. They spoke about how she would have been the best mother, how she was already the most loving aunt and godmother, and how her absence left a gap that could never be filled. For Kiana Smith, the impact of that night went beyond her physical injuries. Her recovery was long, marked by the determination to regain her independence and to provide safety for her child. She eventually moved into a new home, found a job she loved, and worked to rebuild a sense of normalcy. But the emotional weight remained. She still carries the memory of that night and the belief that more than one person was involved, a belief rooted in what she experienced and in details from the investigation that have yet to be resolved publicly. Moving forward has meant living with unanswered questions, but also finding the strength to speak out and to keep Asia's story alive. For everyone who knew her, the aftermath has been a mix of grief, resilience, and a commitment to never let her memory fade. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a soon-to-be mother. Her life was full of promise, grounded in love for the people around her and the future she was working to build. And it ended in a moment of violence no one can ever take back. The story of Asia Takara Grice is one that carries the weight of both what we know and what we may never know. It is a story about control, how it can quietly take hold in someone's life until their freedom is no longer their own. It is about secrecy, the truth that may have been hidden, the conversations that happen behind closed doors, and the pieces of the puzzle that remain out of reach. And it is about the cost of silence, the moments when speaking up feels dangerous, but saying nothing can be far more devastating. For her family, her friends, and the community that stood with them. The ache of losing Asia and her unborn son King will always be there. Their fight to keep her memory alive is not just about honoring her life, but about making sure the warning signs in her story are never ignored. Silence doesn't protect the truth. Sometimes it buries it. If this story moved you, help us keep telling them. Subscribe, share this video, and comment where you're watching from. The more we speak their names, the harder it is for the world to forget them.